Justice of the Wild. Chapter 1. Wednesday, 2:15 p.m. Ramphur Singh looked across the classroom. What's he up to now, Paul wondered as he caught his eye. He watched his crazy, mad scientist friend slip a folded note to Princess Debbie next door. With her half-smile that drove him to the brink of insanity and a quick sleight-of-hand movement, she passed it smoothly along the well-travelled route, 4 desks to her right. He deftly palmed it to Bhuti Nokunyani, his immediate neighbour. Opening it stealthily beneath his desktop, Paul read, "Storm, 10 minutes on the dot, $5." He glanced at his digital watch, his 16th birthday present. It showed 14 hours, 15 minutes, 34 seconds. He picked up a pencil and wrote, "You're on." Now 14 hours, 15 minutes, 52 seconds. Undetected, the crumpled reply returned along the same route. Ramphur opened it, smiled, checked his watch, and nodded. Paul looked outside. A dense, black, sinister-looking mega-cloud driven forward by gale-force winds loomed and sped with menace across the heavens, darkening the sky. Paul loved it. A serious monster rainstorm was headed this way. The earthy, rainy smell triggered his younger days. His parents never knew how he would prance around in their secluded garden at home, naked in the rain. As an only child, he spent a lot of time by himself. Now his family was falling apart. He had another quick look outside. The cloud wave approached rapidly. Stitched together, stray patches of cotton wool annihilated shards of blue sky. Flashes of lightning produced triple forte timpani. No rock band at a concert with their latest electronic sound gear could wish for a more satisfying din. A large stray drop splashed against the window pane, carving a metre-long path through the dust. He glanced at Ramphur, who was trying hard to appear calm and collected. Well, guess what, thought Paul. For once his friend was wrong, and he knew it. It was a dead giveaway how he ran slim fingers through his thick, jet-black mop and kept checking outside. Even the wink he tossed was just another nervous sign. Paul resisted squeezing the new emerging pimple on his chin and turned his attention to the tedious afternoon history lesson he and the rest of the class were embroiled in. It dragged with no end in sight. History teacher Buster Lister spoke his own version of Shakespearean English and could be an amiable person outside of class. Sometimes. But when he waxed lyrical on his favourite topic, the history of the struggle in South Africa, his voice submerged into a monotonous tone that brought about a sluggish, soporific effect on his learners. Groans of rebellion were pointedly heaved and breathed around the class. Grade 11 students were far too young to recall the events of 1994, the year South Africa held its first democratic elections. To Paul and his colleagues, history was best left buried in the past. There were more important things to focus on, like Princess Debbie, the absolute secret love of his life, his music, the latest cell phone technology, Facebook, and, of course, animals. But to Paul's parents, Bernard and Martha Patterson, and indeed most grown-ups of Mr. Lister's era, the elections were a life-changing experience. Some spoke of it as a miracle day, to be nurtured in memories forever. That's like okay and cool, Paul reflected, but right now there was an exciting, brutal storm out there to be relished and kept at bay just long enough to win his bet and rub Ramphur's hawk nose in it. Wednesday, 2:20 p.m. The Lion Park was located 5 kilometers away as the crow flies. There, in one of the camps, a group of lions moved restlessly beneath wildly thrashing clusters of very old and very tall blue-gum trees. The nervous young male of the pride, larger than the rest, with a huge dark tawny mane, padded back and forth alongside the 4-metre-high double bonnox fence. His family of 5 agitated females watched his every move. At each thunderclap he would recoil and growl softly. Highly strung and greatly on edge, he sought in vain for an exit through the fence, for shelter, to wait out the ominous electric storm. There was scant cover in this 5-acre enclosure that was home to them. The camp consisted of a small field of tall thatching grass, dotted with blue-gum trees and acacia trees. A narrow dirt road wound around the perimeter and back to the gated entrance. Wednesday, 2:25 p.m. A short distance away, seated at his desk in the administration block, Martin Resnick winced at the clamour of the storm. He stared through his office window at the trees in the camps bending and twisting about in the wind. He pressed a button on the intercom. "Joseph," he shouted, "don't feed them just yet. Tell the guys to wait till the worst is over." "Okay, boss," the voice crackled back. "This is a big one." "Looks like it," Martin said. He knew how irritable lions became in weather like this. At best, when the food truck entered, they were aggressive. At times they would leap onto the back to snatch their choice share of the spoil. No, they were left best without food in these conditions. You don't mess with these guys, Martin thought. Hungry lions are vicious. When the storm was over, he would make sure his wardens were extra careful feeding them. Even though when their bellies were full, he was one of the few who could walk with impunity among the friendlier ones. But he would never ever dare approach them under these circumstances. No way. Martin enjoyed the fact that scores of eager city dwellers and tourists, whose closest brush with wild animals usually comprised an assortment of zoo creatures behind bars, experienced a sharp reaction within the confines of the lion park. Here their blood pressure shot up considerably. The scary, in-your-face proximity of the legendary king of beasts on his own turf caused a rush that was both exhilarating and quite unique. The park is safe, thought Martin, provided you remained securely in your car. Reaching out of the window to stroke one of these oversized pussycats was never a very good idea. He recalled a few years back when some lioness had indeed attacked and killed 2 unfortunate and unwise Taiwanese tourists. The reckless pair had left their car to get a closer look and take pictures. More recently, an American woman was leaning out of the window for a better picture when a lioness crept up unseen alongside the car and bodily dragged her out. Unfortunately, she did not survive the attack. Those tragic episodes were entirely due to gross foolhardiness, plus a total disregard for the park's strict rules. The publicity these attacks spawned far outweighed the negative connotations. The Lion Park usually scored a surge of morbidly curious visitors following similar episodes. There is really no such thing as bad publicity, Martin thought. But today, with lightning and thunder roaring about, heralding the imminent storm, there were no visitors. No people, no cars, no cameras, no food, nothing to distract the pent-up animals. Wednesday, 2:30 p.m. "And that," declared Mr. Lister solemnly, "concludes our lesson for today." His favourite conniving ploy, thought Paul. The man's got a double Ph.D. in deceit. Time without number he would make that wished-for, eagerly anticipated announcement. Then, with hardly a decent pause for breath, he would proceed to bend the ears of his long-suffering audience a further 10 to 20 minutes, depending on his perverse, mean mood, especially during the last period of the day. Even the looming storm outside would not deter his resolve to wind up the lesson to his absolute satisfaction. "Lest we forget," he continued without missing a beat, as Paul rolled his eyes and the class loudly shuffled their feet in protest, "the most important aspect of any country's history is to learn from it. What's the point of history," he uttered the word with deep reverence, "if one cannot benefit from it?" He looked around the room inquiringly. Did this mentally challenged moron really expect a response? Ramfer put up his hand. Here's fun, thought Paul. "Well, sing." "Please, may I leave the room, Mr. Lister, sir?" Not a muscle moved on his face. Oliver Twist was asking for more with lilting rhyme in rap format. Nascent giggles rippled around the classroom as the beadle narrowed his eyes and rewarded Ramfer with one of his notorious looks. "And me, sir," said Paul, putting up his hand quickly, taking advantage of the pause. A clap of thunder, with perfect timing, shook the classroom, rattling windows dramatically. Giggles crescendoed to suppressed laughter. "Et tu, Mr. Patterson? Weak bladder, no doubt," Mr. Lister said, measuring each syllable while adjusting his specs. He contemplated holding the two to ransom a little longer, but in a sudden U-turn briskly waved them out and fixed the rest of the class with a challenging stare. "Without a country's past, it has no future," he continued, warming once again to his closing sermon, ignoring the rumbling thunder blended with loads of tangible hostility. "Take Nelson Mandela, for example." Wednesday, 2:32 p.m. They reached the door together and hurried out. Paul thrust his watch into Ramfer's face. "You've got 45 seconds. "I make it 60, Ramfer said, checking. 15 seconds. He glanced up at the sky. It was black. Strong gusts tugged their uniforms. "You're such a loser." "Let's go," shouted Ramfer. They dashed across the quadrangle towards the covered walkway leading to the dormitory block. "Okay, cough up," announced Paul, sticking out his hand. "Look, Ma, no rain." At that, a sudden shattering flash brightly lit the sky. An ear-splitting blast and clamorous roar like a rocket launch followed a split second later. The boys ducked instinctively as heaven opened her floodgates. The walkway was simply not wide enough to prevent sheets of water lashing in on both sides. They charged for the dormitory, but were drenched to the skin as they arrived, laughing breathlessly. "Loser, am I? Huh? Who owes who?" shouted Ramfer triumphantly, stamping water from his shoes. "Oh, luck," said Paul. "There's no end to Ramfer's good fortune." They looked bedraggled. "Did you see the lightning? Near the Lion Park." "Yup," said Paul. "It was there, all right." "Hey, there's Aisha and Debbie," said Ramfer. "Wonder how they managed to escape." He waved to the girls standing under the veranda at the far end of the quad. Cupping his hands, he shouted, "Let's grab a Coke when the rain stops." The girls waved back. Suddenly the rain increased. The torrent became a deluge. "Those two are destined to spend the rest of the afternoon standing right there," said Ramfer. "Any bets?" Before Paul could retort suitably, another almighty flash, more devastating than the first, exploded across the heavens. "Wow, definitely the Lion Park," Paul muttered. He wondered how animals there reacted to violent storms such as this. He thought about Soldier, the fearless Rottweiler they had when he was younger. How nervous the dog would be whenever thunder and lightning were about. He would shiver, shake, and scratch at the door to get into the house, and then make a muddied paw beeline for the foot of the bed, where he would remain curled up, shivering for the duration. Unfortunately, when he was 14 years old, he contracted a rare muscular disease that crippled him, and he had to be put down. Paul had wept bitterly for days after that, and he and his father buried his beloved Soldier among the roses in the back garden. Life was less complicated then. Paul was passionate about 3 things in his life. 4 if you counted Princess Debbie. 1 were his parents, 2 was music, 3 was the welfare of animals. His mind was set firmly on becoming a vet or a ranger one day, or both, with music as a sideline. Music would probably be his first choice if it weren't for his acne. No performer in his right mind would appear in public with a monster pimple face like his. "Let's get changed and wait for the girls," said Rumpher. "Okay, but I've got to do some practicing," Paul replied. "Music teachers are merciless." "You just want to impress Debbie," Rumpher laughed. "I know your type." You should take it up," said Paul. "It's good for the brain." "And for getting girl fans, I've noticed," said his friends. "Besides, there's nothing wrong with my brain." "And all that scientific stuff you keep cramming into your head," said Paul. "It'll make you crazy someday." "But hey, it already has." They hurried into their room with a wave towards the girls, who ignored them as they waited for the storm to abate. Wednesday, 2:35 p.m. At the Lion Park, tension peaked as the intensity of the heavy storm continued unrelentingly. Hurricane-force wind lashed the trees and tall grass where the young lion, amber eyes smouldering, crouched low. He was an alpha male. In a mighty territorial battle the week before, he had defeated 2 older males in that very camp. He would have killed them both had Martin Resnick not intervened, separating them. Unkunzi, meaning bull, a name given to him by one of the warders, remained a problem. An undisputed leader, he unfortunately sometimes, without warning, presented a bad attitude, despite his progress under Martin's training. Decisions for his pride were paramount and unchallenged. He could influence his females whichever way he chose. Suddenly, a brilliant mammoth flash illuminated the entire camp. A heavy electrical charge carrying millions of volts tore upwards through the trunk of the tallest blue gum tree, vaporizing its sap en route, ripping it in 2. The lightning surged its way upward to the low cloud directly above. All oxygen in its path, consumed by the heat, formed a jagged vacuum cylinder beneath earth and cloud, 1/2 kilometer long and averaging 3 meters wide. Time froze. Then, with a deafening roar, the surrounding air molecules crashed together to fill the void. The thunderous implosion detonated and reverberated along the valleys and hills, bouncing to the stratosphere and back. The tall blue gum tree split nearly in 2 down the middle, stood poised for a moment before the 2 halves plunged earthwards in opposite directions. One half fell towards the pride as they scattered in fright. The other landed directly across the 4-meter-high double fence surrounding their camp. The immense weight crushed the thick steel mesh of both fences flat onto the ground, short-circuiting the park's entire electrical system. Almost immediately, another bolt struck a smaller tree nearby, searing a scorch mark along the length of its trunk. This was followed by yet another thunderous blast. The lions were flustered. Their only instinct was to get away as quickly as possible. Spotting a possible escape route, Kunzi, in a calculated move, headed towards it. He mounted the trunk of the fallen tree, gingerly tested his weight, then, satisfied, crossed over the double fence to the open veldt on the other side. His 5 females obediently followed. They made their way through the tall grass and began searching for shelter. At last, about a kilometre further on, they came upon a cluster of bushes next to the outer perimeter fence, where they lay down, huddled together. There they waited for the storm to subside.